Clearly, the offer to stay in silence worked well during the break, but I hope the words that were spoken have stayed in your heart. And what I would encourage for some of the people asking questions around how do we breathe, how do we bring this into our work? I think you asked a question around green finance and the conversations you will be in. Now, I've spent 20 years working in green finance. And green finance itself is struggling, and now is the time to be brave and to be speaking our truth from our hearts. That's what I hope, well, that's certainly what I took from the conversation this morning, and that's the invitation today. And it's about weaving these worlds together, of finding a path forward. But we have to be brave, and we can be braver if we are actually also standing together in community. So it's not an either or. This is how do we weave this into all the extraordinary work you're already doing. And this next session is a great example of doing that in the world of finance, in the world of economics. I am so extraordinarily pleased to be able to welcome to stage Kate Raworth, who I suspect needs very little introduction, but the author of Donut Economics, the most extraordinary book that I think she describes herself as a renegade economist, but to really think about an economics that works for all of life. And so Kate is a mother, an activist, and one of the most extraordinary people I'm delighted to call my friend. And she is joined on the stage by Dr. Kamana Bima. And I'm actually going to use my phone because there's a couple of Hawaiian words that I will struggle with without that. But Kamana has come to this conference all the way from Hawaii. He joined us along with Kate and many others on the water pilgrimage on Monday to bring his ideas, his wonderful spirituality, his energy into this conference. He is a professor and director of the Kamakakalani Center for Hawaiian Studies at the University of Hawaii. He has been working on ancestral circular economy, so some of the ideas you heard in the first panel, how those can be woven together into the study of economy today and how we might move that forward. These two have been in collaboration before the beginning of this conference, but I know for this conference, and this is the first time they've met physically, but the connection between them and the scheming of what has gone on for what you are about to witness, I don't think it's going to be a traditional panel, but with no further words from me, I could not be more excited to welcome Kate and Kamana to the stage to take us now deeper.
O nauna I ta hala me ta lehua, e hale lehua no ia nata no e. Ta uno ia no I nei heli nei ho I o tahiti mai. A hiti mai no outou, a hiti puno me te alohai. Aloha e. Aloha. Aloha. Aloha mai kākou. Sorry, hello. It's an honor and a privilege to be here and to share this incredible space together. I can't say enough about my respect and deep aloha and gratitude for Kate and all of her courageous work. And so I'm going to go ahead and get us started. This is me. I flew a long way, so if you want to stay in contact, please take a picture, and need more friends to help Aloha Aina and Hawaii. So back? Oh, I'm sorry. Yes. Yes. Great. Okay. Got the picture. Here we go. So I come from a beautiful place. In some perspectives, we're seen as the most remotely isolated islands on the planet, roughly 3,000 miles between either continent. But from an ancestral Pacific perspective, an incredible Pacific scholar, Epeli Hau'ofa, really reframed the way that we view, and in particular from a Western European context, our relationship. So we're not tiny islands in a vast sea. We're a vast sea of islands. The ocean connects us. The ocean is a mother, is a resource. There's no dark sea monsters at the end of the ocean. There's embrace and care. And I want to say that islands have played a significant role in shaping and viewing actually how we understand our world. We're in one place to understand that. Had Darwin not been on islands, he would have not seen the evolution, the rapid change in species, the relationships between nature and the ways in which we understand that shape the way that we understand the world today. So today, I'm going to talk a little bit about our ancestral views that were shaped on islands and suggest maybe how they may relate to economics. This is one of our island homes. This is a place called He'ia. Our ancestors were intimately connected and understood and in fact deified natural systems. The water, for instance, is an akua called Kane. And they deified natural systems because those were the systems that gave life. You can see being here on these high islands and experiencing this rainfall for generations, thousands of years, you develop intimate understandings and relationships between seasonality, redistribution. What does the rain cycle do? And in fact, the water, everyone say this word, wai.
Wai.
Wai. Don't be shamed, wai.
Wai.
There we go. Wai translates to water. And so that relationship and understanding of what water did and how it flowed intimately shaped our society. So much so that we developed these intense familial, ancestral, kinship-like relationships with our land and resources. We heard that from our earlier panel. If everyone can say the word, you probably have heard aloha before. Aloha. Aloha, to love, to embrace, to care, to protect, to cherish. Aina. So aina translates literally to that which feeds. Oftentimes we translate it as land, but it's land and resources. So this intimate relationship, the beauty of, and think about, we heard in the earlier panel, love. What's better than being in love in the world? Seriously, not many things, right? But let me tell you, the benefits of loving Aina, loving Mother Earth, is when you're a teenager, she doesn't break up with you and date your best friend. There's no divorce in loving the Aina. There's no separation in loving the Aina. It fundamentally roots and grounds us in our perspectives and understanding in who we are and our relationship to the places that we engage with. It defines this responsibility and relationship between Mother Earth and us to steward, to care, to protect. And I'll talk about that some later. And it frames really our modern movement in Hawaii around social justice and ecological justice. So our ancestors created, and we still cultivate and restore these incredible systems of really agroecological systems that created abundance for our islands. They were systems that were intimately connected between nature and culture. And we did so in ways that really, in ways like we hear, like ecomimicry. By looking at the water cycle, we understood we're not going to take all of the water. We're not going to build, I usually use the Hoover Dam, but that might have a lot of resonance with this audience. So when we think of dams in an Anglo context, usually you take all of the water, right, and you stop it. Our ancestors understood, no, you take part of the water, and then when you're done with it, it returns to the stream because the ecology and the systems need to survive and live. These systems were intimately connected with these lokoia, or aquacultural, some of the earliest aquaculture in the world, fish ponds, where our ancestors, again, taking that water in abundance and that nutrient-rich water that flows through our tidal streams, now cultivated algae, something that's easy to proliferate, and particularly herbivorous fish, where you can get larger scales of biomass quickly than you could if you cultivated predators, right? So these are some of the cultivation techniques that our ancestors did and utilized to understand really how they would feed our people and the world. And there's some evidence that, as our populations grew, archaeologically, we had to adapt. There were periods of minor declines of nearshore systems, and we developed this fish pond technology largely to solve for that, to create more mass and abundance. Taken together, and I want to take a second here. If everyone can say the word wai again. Wai. So wai is water, that which flows, and the word for wealth in our language is wai wai, water, water. So an economy should be like the water cycle and system. It should flow. It should be cyclical. It should go up into the mountains, cultivate, come down as rain, provide nutrients all the way through until it reaches the ocean and the system starts again. And that understanding fundamentally shaped how our ancestors tried to create an economy, and did create an economy. And I want to stop here for a second. In the brilliant talks I heard earlier, like my ancestors and indigenous ancestors, I think we heard hunter-gatherers. What they called us was we had a subsistence economy. So as if all we did was to subsist, right? And so the tropes, and this is where Kate's work is so powerful, the tropes of economics have fundamentally reshaped how we think about people and their gifts and their contributions to the world. We did not subsist, we created abundance. And so our ancestral system really worked around the water. We developed a system of a kalai'aina that mimicked the water cycle, where resources would be distributed generationally. I can get into a lot of detail here, but I don't want to lose you guys. An annual system of sort of assessment and cycling to create this state of abundance, of wai, of wealth, and that system should return and continue to flow. So in one of our publications, when we developed this concept of ancestral circular economy, this is an image of Paipai'oheia. These are some of the key principles. I'll say it really is the prioritization of relationship building. That economic system and structure fundamentally empowered people to understand their relationships between Mother Earth, Aloha Aina, between each other, between species and resources. When it worked well, and it wasn't always highly functioning, but when it worked well, there was balanced governance structures. There was enough of top-down and bottom-up knowledge to create abundance of these resources. Let me give you an example. In Hawaii today, I sat on a body, a water resource management body. We had roughly 50 staff. In ancestral systems, when this was fully functioning, you had a whole population that was intimately connected with their water resources, that knew the spawning seasons and cycles of veil fish, these particular fish, and how it changed in different regions. There was systematic and regular redistributions of wealth and power. And it promoted these really regenerative social ecological processes. And I think this is probably one of the most important concepts, is this environmental kinship, is the recognition that there is no separation between nature and culture. That actually, let me tell you guys something. Anyone not born on Earth, we are all children of Mother Earth. The framing and worldview in some ways that shape how we understand the world in science in this particular building is not true. And I want to say, if you want to learn more about these fish ponds, ironically, if you go down into the Pitt Rivers Museum, I don't know if Kate planned this, but my friends that work on these ponds are actually featured in the Pitt Rivers Museum. There's a Mauku to Makai thing. Go look at the videos and you can learn a lot more down there. Okay, our ancestral system was rapidly changed, and there was severe interventions, not just with capitalism, but with the American overthrow and overtaking of our country. These are some kind of documented collapses, if you will, since these introductions. And we've seen shifts and resource depletion and decline. The linear extractive economy is totally focused on resources. And what does it do? It degrades them. We need more hotels. Okay, what do we do to get more hotels? We build all along the shores. Okay, that's not enough. We need military and militarism and dollars to support the livelihood and lives on the islands. And so these systems have brought our islands to the point of collapse, where maybe you've seen the tinderbox of one of our places, Lahaina, that burned recently and lost family members and places. So Hawaii today, any day you look in the headlines, this is kind of what it looks like. Priced out of paradise, Navy leaking jet fuel into our aquifers, families having to move away and not being able to survive. Because with all of that beauty that you saw, comes a different aspect of wealth, comes the billionaires buying up our towns, the rapid rise of real estate and these other issues. Hawaii went from that ancestral system that fed roughly 1 million people. Our population today is about 1.2 million people. Today we probably import 80% of our food. So this is what it looks like to bring food into these islands today. Mats and containers, you can imagine the carbon emissions, the fossil fuels that are associated with this, and the waste. So coming out of COVID, which was this rapid pause, first time in generations in our islands that we saw our beaches not full of sunscreen from tourists and not just overrun by bodies and activities. Natural systems started to be restored. We saw sharks returning to areas in our nearshore fisheries that we don't normally see. We saw turtles laying eggs and nesting in areas where they would never go to. It was an amazing time. And so in that period, a group of myself and my friends, we created this Aina Aloha Economic Futures. Deeply inspired by the circular economy work that was happening in Europe, Kate's work of donut economics. In fact, I told them, put Kate's work right on our library. She was first on our library in this period. And it fundamentally helped us to, during that pause, and if you remember, the status quo was threatened. We didn't know what that would look like. And that gave us not just the courage, but the opportunity to engage fundamentally in reshaping what our economy would look like for our islands. These are our values: aloha aina, environmental kinship, ecological and social justice, opuali'i. Leaders need to have care. Opuali'i is like this feeling that you have in your stomach, caring for a child, caring for a pet. What was the name of the armadillo that was named? Or we heard that story earlier. His wife opened up to it. Pablo, yes. That feeling, connection to Pablo. Imi oi kela kela is being driven by innovation and design. And ho'okipa is, we recognize we have to be inclusive. I don't like, so the word tribalism is actually misused. If you've been among tribes of people, it's the most caring, loving situation that you can be in. So please don't use tribalism to say the partisanship and militarism and sort of hate that's mongered in contemporary society. But in Hawaii, we understand ho'okipa is something else. We have to host, we have to be inclusive, we have to love. These are roughly our goals, and I'm not going to get into a lot of them, but focused on issues that were really relevant to our islands. And I want to say that ancestral circular economy, again, I can only speak for my lineage and genealogy and place in Hawaii, maybe a little bit in the Pacific, but maybe when we think about circularity, the development of donuts across the world, how do we understand the economies that existed before in those places, that were intimately tied to place, that were regenerative, that created abundance, and we need to uplift that. So in one of our papers, we just try to look at the ancestral circular economy, these universal circular economy policy goals, and how Aina Aloha Economic Futures is sort of embedded and trying to achieve that amongst these circles. And what I want to say is these are incredibly difficult times, and we need to build a team. We need to build love. We need to cultivate it together to solve the greatest crisis that our world has ever faced. And it's incredibly important to love, to create relationships and nurture with each other. And I've seen the end of the road, and at the end of the road for us is Aina. The thing about loving Aina is even it's always going to love you. Even the most terrible, toxic people that I think the Aina should reject. What happens? And maybe that's some of the world leaders I can think of right now. But they too become soil, right? They too become the systems that create abundance and life in our islands again. That shows you about that healing part of our world, of Aina. And so what's it like at the end of your road? Where are you going to? What are the structures and bumps that are there, and how can we support each other to get along that way? And I want to hand it over to my amazing, brilliant, it feels incredible to say colleague. Kate and I started collaborating only online. Kate is the only person in the history of my professional relationships that I've invited to Hawaii that said, "I'm sorry, I don't fly." And so it's an incredible privilege to work together and to conspire. And so I'll hand it over to Kate.
Hi, thanks, Kamana. What is at the end of the road? I'm going to be really honest. At the end of the road I was raised on is so far from where Kamana stands and speaks from. I feel a huge gulf of worldview, of cosmovision, of learning. And I want to acknowledge the generosity of Kamana coming here and sharing this worldview with us, of Geraldine, of Laila, of Mindahi, of Mac, of Nanine, of others, everybody who's come here, whether as a visitor to this conference or a student in this university or an academic in this university, and speaking here of this very, very different worldview. It's so generous. And Laila invited us to give reciprocity. I think we owe reciprocity. So I'm going to speak to the worldview that actually many of us, European, British, God forbid, English, were raised with. I'm going to name it because I feel this huge gulf, and Mac said it, we need to build bridges. We're going to talk about finding a bridge between these worlds that are speaking intermittently together in this conference, but so different. So I hear Kamana speaking of this world, the web of life, of Aina Loha, of Mother Nature, of harmony, balance, and we've heard it again and again from our visitors and friends here. So I need to be honest and say what else is in this room, what's always in this room, because it was created in this room, in this university, and universities like this one, and it's in our minds unless we out it and make it visible. So here's the 20th century Western economics. I was taught in this university that many of you, if you've ever studied Western economics, raise your hand. Yeah, right, look at us, we're all in the room. And if you never studied it, don't worry, you got it anyway. In the newspapers, in the politicians' speeches, in the analysis, in the corporations, we've all been bathed in this. Let's name it. The first image we're taught, economists, what's the first image you remember learning? Supply and demand. Supply and demand. The market, welcome to the market. It's price at the center of our concern. The portrait of humanity is rational economic man, so rational, as Max said. He stands alone with money in his hand, with ego in his heart, with a calculator in his head. He hates work, he loves luxury, he knows the price of everything, and he can never get enough. These are the parameters we put into our equations. This is who we are told we are, and by the way, we start to mimic him. We start to think this is what it means to be economic, and we change. We're shaped and remade by the models that we make. And the goal, of course, it's growth. Endlessly. And nationally, it's GDP. My pension, it's returns. In my bank account, in my company, it's return on return. It's profit, accumulation. Of course. This is the design of the system that we've been raised in, that we've inherited. So I feel so far. When we say, where is nature? Where is the living world? Oh, an economist will tell you that gap between the social and the private cost, there she is, that little red wedge, that's climate breakdown. You want to see biodiversity loss? There, it's that red wedge. It's all in that little red wedge. That's how we make nature and her loss visible in our diagrams. Where is she in relation to humanity? Well, we're at the top of the pyramid. I mean, she's a Lego block to build with. She's our resource. And growth, well, actually, the living world only gives us a little bit. Water is only a tiny fraction of our national income because it's about human ingenuity and technology. So we can just grow and grow and grow. We'll have enough to clean up later. Who are we kidding? So I was raised here, and I know many of you were too. And Kamana is speaking to us, and many of our friends and visitors are speaking from so far away. How can we bridge this? So the first gesture our society makes is to say, well, natural capital, ecosystem services. But it's still rooted in a language that pulls me back to this finance and this growth, natural capital, because we want a return on this. We have to go further. So I'm going to introduce a story about the donut that I've been amazed and honored and humbled by the role it's playing for some people in helping us move across this bridge. Here is a donut. You don't have to eat them. This is the only one that's good for you. It's conceptual. Think of humanity's, so here's the Western language I often use. Think of humanity's use of Earth's resources. I would love somebody here to help me reframe that. Our interaction with Earth's sources and cycles, radiating out from the center of that picture. So the hole in the middle of the donut is where people are falling short on life's essentials, where people do not have the food, water, health, education, housing, income, voice, that every person has a claim to. I can say that because they're crowdsourced from the SDGs. The power of doing that is that all the world's governments have already agreed that every person in the world has a right not to live in that hole, leave no one in the hole. But as we draw on Earth's resources for our needs and our so very many wants, we start to put pressure on her systems. We start to overshoot these planetary boundaries. Again, a very Western scientific recognition of something that's been known for so long elsewhere, but we're starting to name it in our own worldview. It enters. Planetary boundaries, that's new. It was certainly big news to me. And I, as a social justice, I was working at Oxfam when I first saw them, so I drew a circle inside their circle. If there are outer limits of planetary pressure, there are inner limits, let's call them human rights. And suddenly, the shape of progress isn't that endless growth, it's thriving in balance. I invite you with your hands. Yeah, it's like a heartbeat. It makes sense in our bodies. You look lovely, by the way. It makes sense in our bodies. So, the donut, can it help us bridge? And Kamala and I had a long conversation. Where should it be? And I said, I feel bad putting it in the middle. Like, that's really presumptuous. And we Westerners always think we're closer than, oh, no, there's actually going to be so much further to go. And he invited me to put it in the middle, saying, it's so far away from this, at least it's reaching towards. So I want to say, and many other ways of thinking, well-being economics, economy of the common good, degrowth movement, many, many other gestures. This is just one. We need so many ways of reaching to each other, connecting. What thrilled me is that some places, some city, local councils have, trying to escape from this, have started using the donut. So this thriving living world, right? Can we rename it in this language? They've started using the donut, and they say, can our city live in the donut? They got in touch. Mayors and councillors, what would it mean? Can we try and live in the donut here? So we said, well, let's unroll it. Let's make some space. And there's just a very little question there, except it's not a little question. It's a massive question. I invite you to think of a place you know intimately, you love and care for, whether it's a city or a town or a village or a district or state. How can our city or this place become a home to thriving people in an ecologically thriving place, while respecting the well-being of all people and the health of the whole planet? Yes, that is a complex question. It's complex times. We can break it down into four. So we look at the local aspirations and the global connections. And I'm going to this is what we call the four lenses of Donut Unrolled. I'm going to go very quickly. Can all the people of this place thrive? That is a local question. What does it mean for everyone to thrive here? Who's not thriving? How do we enable them to thrive? This is what actually most local councils focus on, quite rightly. But we also have to ask, can this place be as generous as the wildland next door? Here in Oxford, that's Wytham Woods. If we were to go to Wytham, we would see that she sequesters carbon, she stores groundwater, she cools the air from the treetops to the forest floor, houses biodiversity. Could we create cities that do that, that are as generous as the places in which they're nestled? So these are the local aspirations, and it feels great to be here. But, as every place of the global north especially must recognize, we draw on the whole world for this. Look at this room. I mean, the clothes we're wearing, the electronics, the lights, the carpets, the chairs, this was not made here. It's enabling this quality of education. So what is the impact on the whole planet? Our overshoot of planetary boundaries, that's the overshoot of planetary boundaries. How do we come back within our energy and material use, our share? But also the people who stitch the clothes, who pack the food, who assemble these phones. Are they paid decent wages? The impacts on people now of climate breakdown. So these are the four lenses, and we invite cities to look at themselves in the face through these four lenses. It's not easy. There's now over 80 towns and cities around the world, but these are local governments that have actively, publicly said we're using this framework to reimagine our place. And some of them are bridging from where I stand towards the middle. Here's just two, Barcelona. They unroll the donut, they gathered the data, they re-roll the donut. That's brave, that's not pretty. That's overshoot and shortfall. That's the story they need to turn around. And they're more ambitious than many European cities with their super blocks. Really ambitious policy. This is part of their journey of moving back. Cornwall Council, here in the UK, created the donut as a decision-making wheel. Every infrastructural decision, they now put it through this wheel. Or they've created a long-term compass for calming back within. If I told you Cornish GDP has grown by 1.3% in the last year, don't quote me, it hasn't. But if I told you it had, what does that mean? 1.3% more of what? Oil spills? Divorce? Bike lanes? But this tells us in traffic-like colors what's getting better, what's getting worse. It visually tells us life in its own terms. So there's just a couple of places. We've put out a report if you're interested, our platform, donuteconomics.org. My colleague assembled this report. We are learning from places. How are you escaping from that mindset? And how are you getting started, trying to cross that bridge towards a worldview that you know makes sense, but your entire culture around you is pulling you back? So we're bridging. Some places starting to move. And that's amazing. But what's really surprised and honored me is that folks like Kamana, reaching back from the other side, connecting with the donut as a halfway point to a worldview that they're forced to interact with because it's the dominant system in the world. A Maori scholar, Taina Boasadeen, she redrew the donut in a way that made sense to her. So playing with it. The government of Bhutan have said we're drawing on this and putting it together with our concept of gross national happiness to reimagine the future of the city of Thimphu. Can we use this concept here? It's a huge honor that they would choose to engage with this concept, reaching out towards people whose voices they need to speak to, that maybe this halfway point makes sense. And then this work here now with Kamana and this Aina Aloha economic futures. How can we embrace the ancestral circular economy? So let's sit down together. Let's get onto this bridge. And think about how we can move further across. So let's start with this. Words matter, right? Words matter, pictures matter. And when I first started, I'm going to get closer to you. When I first started having conversations with Kamana, I was like, hang on, sometimes you say aloha aina, and sometimes you say aina aloha. I'm getting confused. So this says, what does this say?
So aloha aina.
Say it, folks. What does it mean?
Aloha is an action. It's a verb that has to be done to something in this context. So aloha in this isn't stative. So you have to aloha, you have to actively love, care for, cherish aina, that which feeds. So if there's one thing from this concept, instead of thinking of land, What if you thought of it as that which feeds? What kinds of decisions would you make differently to care for that which feeds?
And then this says,
And if we move it this way, aina aloha,
say it.
that which feeds us, our lands, are in a state of love. They're beloved, they're cared for, they're cherished. So in forming our organization, that's the goal, is to have that which feeds, that which nourishes us, cares for us, in a state of love.
Brilliant. So let's put Aina Aloha there. Okay. So I want to get down into the economics, right, underneath all of this. And at Donut Economics Action Lab, when we talk with companies, lots of companies come, oh, we love the donut. It's a great logo. Yeah, that. We could be a donut company. We say, hang on, we don't want to talk about the design of your products. I'm sure they're great, but we want to talk about the design of your company. We want to talk about how you are actually deeply designed. And we have 5 deep design traits. I like things on cardboard, but I'll put them up on the screen too. So, dear company, think of a company, you know, think of one you love, you hate, big one, small one, any company. What is its purpose? Why does this company exist in the world? What is it in service of? Its networks, relationship, its employees, suppliers, customers, industry allies, lobby relations. Is it living out its values in these? Is it showing its purpose through how it relates to those it's related to? How is this company governed? I mean, who's even in the room when decisions get made? What are the metrics of success? Who has voice here? Now, I call this corporate psychotherapy because the deeper we go, the more profound it gets. So how is this company owned? Is it owned by a family for 300 years, by its employees, by shareholders, by venture capital, by the state? Because how it's owned is going to profoundly shape what sits at the bottom of this psychotherapy tree, which is finance, which is the money. Where is that money that drives this company? Where is it coming from? And therefore, what is it expecting? And what is it extracting? And what is it reinvesting? What is it extracting for those who own and expect extraction? And what is it reinvesting in the purpose? So this is the conversation we always have with companies. Because to me, then we're really getting down to the deep design of the economics, that we can tell whether a company truly is designed to be in service to a purpose that's bigger than itself, or actually everything is designed to be in service of finance and extraction for those owners. And that gets down to the heart of capital. So when we were talking about getting together and having this conversation, I started coming with, and I suddenly realized even this language is loaded with my culture's assumptions about the kinds of concepts. Do you want to share? So here's one we made together.
So on the back of a chocolate box, I believe, and after some wonderful dinner with your family, we sat together and brainstormed. And thinking about that, when we discussed purpose, purpose is a beautiful thing. We can all define our purpose, the things we want to accomplish. But from our context, ancestrally, while you may have an individual purpose, you have a larger responsibility. So I do what I do because my grandmother worked and gave her entire life to children, youth, our islands. I was born into that responsibility. Our community mobilizes to restore fish ponds, to spend sweaty hours in the sun, limited pay, because we know we have a responsibility to feed future generations, to live in dignity with the ancestral innovations that our kupuna means our ancestors created. And rather than networks, great to have networks, that's why I put my picture up there. Want to have more networks, not trying to attack it. But we have to think in terms of relations, relationships between Mother Earth, between each other, continents, governance, individuals. What are the relationships that we cultivate? And that gives us a sense of shared responsibility. We can decide and understand agreements. So there's ways in which we treat the aina. We do modify the landscape. But when we do so, it should be done in a way that benefits 6, 7 generations down the line. So those fish ponds that I showed you were created over 900 years ago. Survived tidal waves, tsunamis, every natural disaster, hurricanes in our islands. But the bones of that fish pond remain for 900 years so that people of my generation could decide we're going to restore them. We're going to provide abundance and feed our people again. Instead of ownership, we have knownership. Are you known by your lands and place? Does the land know you? Yeah. And we struggled with this. Finance was the hardest one, I thought. But we talked about flows. It's about flows of resources, the things that bind are you known by the land? What are your agreements, your relations, and your responsibility? And then to flow like white.
And this flows, again, it's way, right? It's way. It's so, we were talking about the finance, the language of finance. I want my finance to be liquid, and it's used in a watery way, and it literally means way in your language, but it flows. So I'm feeling really playful here. Because this never goes away. I just really want to acknowledge, listening this morning and yesterday, Nikki said, where's Nikki? He said you spoke to somebody, you showed a photograph from the woman you spoke to, indigenous woman. She said, what is it you don't understand? And partly by putting this up, I'm trying to say it. I don't know if it's what is it we don't understand. It's definitely what we weren't raised deep within. But I want to say, what is it you are still attached to? We are still attached to this. And here it is. I just have to do this. Just here comes finance. Here comes finance. Always in the room, don't think it's gone away just because we're talking about Earth. Finance is here. Finance. Finance wants the people to know it's green. It's green, but finance still wants to accumulate. This is what all of this is problematic with, because this finance doesn't want to flow. Finance wants to accumulate. Is GDP or in your pension fund, we are utterly dependent upon a system in which finance accumulates. And this, to me, is, we're not going to solve this. We're not going to cross that bridge unless we change finance. And let's just remember one thing about finance. Everything Kamana has been sharing and showing is earth. It's real. It's natural. It's billions of years old. It makes sense. Finance. Yeah, look at me when I talk to you. Finance. Are you natural? Oh. Are you a human construct? Mm-hmm. Does that mean we could actually reinvent you? Yes, we could. Let's just remember, finance is a human construct. We made this. It's nothing real, there's nothing innate, there's nothing immutable, inherent. Finance is a design, totally made up by us, but completely, it's stopping us from reconnecting. So we need to remake finance, whether it comes in yellow or green form, we need to redesign finance. And I'm going to be honest, I don't know how. I just know that this hosepipe is always on the stage. And if we don't bring it in and talk about it, it is going to drive us and keep pulling us back here, right? Back here in this mindset. And I also want to say, this is still what's taught to economists in this university, in all Western universities. This is the shape of progress. It's rising and it's measured in finance. And until we stop teaching the next generation to think like this, we are we're just replicating this mindset and then wondering why we're a gulf away. We have some more cardboard for you. More cardboard that came up over supper. So someone like me, I trotted off to university, study economics, because I thought I would then know the mother tongue of public policy. So I'm an economist. Hello. Actually, you never would say, hello, I'm an economist. People just go and get another drink. So economics. And then we get excited. I certainly got excited. No, look. We're doing new economics. We're doing new economics, and actually we can reclaim this and have some new ideas. Kamana, have you ever heard of the circular economy? We are going to bring the circular economy to Hawaii. We're going to teach you new economics. All these people and places, we ignore what you already knew. We've got new economics.
So I believe it's imperative, as we are trying to solve for the snake of finance, and to redesign our economies in places around the world, to understand what Indigenous people knew of their economy, of their place, of circularity, of creating systems that are regenerative in love and abundance.
And two things I want to say. This concept comes from a Maori scholar called Shane Edwards. And I really appreciate, I want you budge me this way, because what Kamana and others and those who are here generously sharing, you are helping people like me, many of us, right? You're with the K, the canoe economics. You're helping us humbly say, oh, we don't have all the new economic answers. It was known. And actually, can we connect and can we cross this bridge? And can we find our way back to an earth? And can we rewrite the economic syllabus so finance is dethroned and reinvented? Okay, yeah. Okay. We have a question here. Okay, this is, people always ask the hardest questions. What do you think of alternative forms of economic exchange aside from money? Do you want to have a crack at that?
Yes, I think they're happening all the time in this model. People's responsibility and their relations form where we spend our time and resources. And so I love the share apps, the initiatives of establishing small-scale trade relationships between people and families. I think that's all really critical and important. And in fact, those are sometimes, as we're restoring our ancestral systems of food and fish, if it doesn't go to the market, right, it doesn't count towards GDP. And so sometimes when people measure sustainability, how much are we feeding ourselves, all of those things are lost. So we do have to consider those alternative forms of exchange that are real and feeding towards Mother Earth. The things that provide abundance and resource are the ones that we should uplift.
I've just remembered I have a question for you, because I want to push the donut. So I'm aware that the donut helps connect, but the more that I get invited to stand in the middle of this bridge and I'm invited by and connected with folks like Kamana, the more, that feeling of the more you know, the less you know. And the more I see the dangers and shortfalls of it, and the much further there is to go. So it's hard for me to do this, but I'm going to do this. Because I know that this is a very valuable concept, and but we also need to go beyond. It needs to keep rolling. It's a donut for shape. It's on the roll. So at one level, the donut literally centers people, right? It centers people, not capital. That's why it helps us move. But if you look at the 9 planetary boundaries, one is different from all of the others. It's called biodiversity loss. It's got all other living beings in it. And the danger is, if we do this badly, if we move weakly, that we end up centering ourselves while losing our kin. So what if, for me, this is one of those conceptual leaps that you can only make when you've gone so far. What if we were to open up the hole in the circle and invite all other living beings in there with us? Which again, I'm sure many of you in the room from a Cosmovision saying, welcome folks, like get on board. But it's that step. So Kamana, would you just reflect on what kinds of relations and agreements do you feel your culture already holds and that we can learn to hold if we're all here together?
Yeah, so in our culture, one of the key indicators of health of all those things in the middle of the donut now goes back to water, to wai. If our streams flow and are healthy, they connect our mountain resources and our marine resources, and they provide abundance and flow. So I think putting those in the middle requires us to think about, again, our relationships with the most essential things that provide life. And think about water, think about, in my naive perspective, a measure of the development, the civilization of society should be how they treat their water. Because water is what gives life to everything in there. And I think it's absolutely fundamental and critical and courageous of Kate to consider that this is the alternative, this is the vision and movement forward.
So there are many places on this bridge, and there's no one. Many of us, I certainly couldn't jump from the economics I was taught to your worldview. We can't appropriate it. As Mac was saying, we have to find our own. I have to find my own stories, my own culture, my own practices, my own belief system. And I'm on such a similar journey to you, but in the realm of economics. And different people find different portals along the way valuable. So some people say, oh, the donut, it's such a transformative concept. This changes my worldview. And other people I've encountered say, it's anthropocentric, go further. You've got to get biocentric. And all of these places are valuable if they're helping us move. So I would invite, I know we're asked for action out of this conference. I would invite us all to think of our own mindset. How can I change the way I speak about the living world? How can I change the diagrams I teach, I learn, I replicate? How can I change the practices, at least to help myself and others behind me, to bring them with me, and those in front of me to move towards them? How can we each keep ourselves moving? And then also maybe to remember it's not a linear bridge, it's probably a circle, and you go all the way around and you find that others already knew economics. Do you have any thought of the action that we can bring from here?
So figuring out how to reconnect with your resources, how to aloha aina. So if that activates on an individual level, fantastic. I think it's supporting initiatives that do love and care for resources, and I'll get to direct action issues, for instance. As an indigenous person around the world, I don't think we should be the only ones defending our resources, and we're not. And if bodies can't be there with us, what are the ways in which you can support that care and that concern? Because when the military is poisoning an aquifer, it's not my rational mind that says, I'm going to go stand up against the US Navy. That sounds like a great idea. It comes from a deep place of care. And it's incredibly difficult and vulnerable. I remember when that was happening, my uncle, I'm out speaking out on these issues. My uncle said, the Navy is trained to kill people, right? Yeah, I know. So how can we support courageous actions? And Kate is courageous. Courageous actions everywhere in intervening with the economy. What Kate's model has brought to the world has allowed communities like us to argue at seats of table that before they could just write us off because the economy is based on GDP, it's growth, it's linear, it's extractive, and that's how it is. And Kate's work has made it more viable for people to not be able to ignore our efforts. So support courageous activity, love your land and place, reconnect yourself and your families to your resources, and figure out how you can connect and care for your water.
I think we have time for one question from the room. Yes, yourself, yeah. Big question. I'll give a brief, okay. So when you say global finance, I suppose you mean money that's investing, that's owned by someone, an institution somewhere, and is investing somewhere else. I want to go, so I know this conference is both what is the best we can do with the constructs we currently have, and then today is saying, and then let's let ourselves go beyond that as well. So I don't want to, I mean, my thought is I don't think we'll succeed by only redirecting finance. I think we need to redesign finance, whether it's global or local. I think we need, that's, you know, that's why Hosepipe here is, so this thing is designed, it's invented, it's made. It's insane that this human construct, which of course accumulates power and you know, it's designed to accumulate. That's what it wants to do. It wants a rate of return. And I find myself just continually asking why Earth is in the hands it's currently in. Earth is dying, and finance wants its return. This is what we have to deconstruct and redesign. So it's so much, I can say that. I don't know how we begin to do that with global finance, but I'm not willing to say, okay, finance exists and it's there. It's there, and we just have to learn to work with it, because this design is unnatural. Nothing in life grows forever and succeeds. It's in our bodies, it's a cancer. It will destroy the systems on which it depends. Everything in life is a flow, and it returns into the system, and it's a cycle. And finance is a total outlier of that. So I think we have to deeply redesign finance, and that comes back to people, because all finance is owned by someone. And therefore the expectations and the demands of the very wealthy particularly, who still want more. So it deeply comes back to who we tell ourselves we are, and this need for never getting enough. So I don't know the answer, but I'm just going to give an answer from there. I think we won't get an answer until we redesign finance. I don't think the finance as it's humanly invented and constructed is compatible with life, conducive to life.
I have to agree with Kate. I think we have to redesign. And I say that recognizing the challenges of what it's like to work on the community grassroots level, where it is critical and important for people to get resources to be able to continue as NGOs. So it's not an either or, but the goal can't be sustainability. We don't want to sustain that graph that I showed you for Hawaii. Increased militarism, decreased carbon. No, we do have to redesign the institution and the structure itself. And finance runs in. A great friend of mine wanted to create this sustainable agricultural effort built on archaeological and ancestral principles for managing resources. He had a whole model. He was going to only return 7%. Finance said, we're not going to fund it. It's not good enough. We need 15. So if that continues to happen in our communities, we will never solve this issue.
On which point, we will not be divided by finance. We're going to close in one of the best ways to connect. We're going to close with a song. So would you like to tell us?
So we worked hard on this and tried to think of what we could do to end our session. And, you know, we began this water pilgrimage, and I was brought with such care and grace, and there was so much effort involved in reconnecting, you know, ancestrally to some of the names and the waterways of this place. And as Kate and I talked, we said we want to sing a song that reminds us of how connected we can be to a resource. And this particular resource this is from the view from my balcony. This is Mauna Kea. This is one of our sacred mountains. It's an ancestor to our people, a site of incredible struggle, where myself and my neighbors and families, you know, had to be involved in direct action to try to better steward this sacred place. And I want to share that today there will be a ceremony in Hawaii on solstice honoring Mauna Kea, and I called back to our communities. I didn't know this was happening, so We're singing to you folks, we're singing to home, and we're singing to my grandmother and my uncle collaborated to write this song. So we're singing to, imagine your grandparents, your uncles, the people that loved you and got all of you here. Dr. Cornel West says, we're all here because someone loved us. I have a 7-month-old daughter. I understand that deeply. We don't get into this room without care and love, whether you're Republican or Democrat, or you guys got Labor and something else, but it's about love. So if we can go here, it's called The Beauty of Mauna Kea.
Can we turn the mics off?
E lei kea noho mai lai ka mauna ki. I luna ku kila. Kila no luna. O luna I ke au. My friend and I would sometimes roam trails of Mauna Kea. In the evening we'd come home, see her standing there. The moon moves around her when she sleeps. The clouds stand beside her when she weeps. And I could be forgotten and 1,000 miles away. Still I would recall the beauty of Mauna Kea. Now to any land you go, she will be with you if you love her like I do. Oh, Mauna Kea. And I live in the city now, and I see different things. In the nights when I'm alone, she's in my dreams. The wind spins around her when she wakes. The sun spreads its warmth across her face. And I could be forgotten and 1,000 miles away, still I would recall the beauty of Mauna Kea. Now to any land you go, she will be with you if you love her like I do.
So I promised you a special session. Yeah, I had no idea. Thank you so much, Kate and Kamana, for doing what today is about, speaking from the heart and being brave. And we don't know exactly how this all plays out, but we know we have to change the system. We cannot stay confined within the system. And so thank you so much for your bravery and for the love that you brought to the room. So maybe another round of applause for Kate and Kamana. So we're going to shift gear now into talking really about social cohesion, how we come together, how, as I said previously, when we come together and we can be brave together, we can actually change far more. We can imagine the world in a very different way. But if it's individuals doing that, we're not going to get very far. So the next speaker we have is Professor Harvey Whitehouse, who is the Professor of Social Anthropology here at Oxford, has written many books, including a book that was just written, or just published, sorry, last week, I believe on Friday, called Inheritance. I've just bought it and I'm already eagerly devouring it. Harvey's worked for over 4 decades on what it takes to bring communities together, from indigenous societies through to football fans. And so right, this isn't just, again, about something that was in the past. This is about today, and this is the future. And so I'm so excited to hear, Harvey, some of your ideas around how we can build coherence, cohesion, to take us forward with some of your ideas. So thank you so much for joining us, Harvey. Thank you.
My profound thanks to Justin and to Natalie and to their colleagues for inviting me to participate in this incredible conference. The session we just witnessed was beautiful, it was heartfelt, it was brilliant, it was entertaining, and in many ways it was deeply inspiring. And I really feel very privileged to have just witnessed all of that with all of you. As you just heard from Justin, I'm an anthropologist, and I started out my career as an anthropologist by carrying out 2 years of field research in the rainforest of Papua New Guinea as part of my doctoral studies at the University of Cambridge. This was back in the late 1980s. The people in Papua New Guinea took me in as a member of their tribe, and they used that word. They helped me to learn their unwritten language and the intricacies of their ancient culture. The people I lived with had no running water, they had no electricity, and they had very little money because they mostly lived off the food they grew in their gardens and the animals they hunted in the rainforest. But they had a very rich culture. And in the course of living with them, they initiated me into the deepest secrets of their religious system. They taught me how to commune with their ancestors and with the spirits of the forest. And this research opened up a host of really fundamental questions. Many of those questions were aired in frequent community gatherings. At least twice a week, the entire community would gather to discuss not only the news of the day, but much bigger issues, ranging from the moral challenges that people were facing in everyday life to things as big as the origins of the world and our place in it. The people I lived with were all members of a religious organization known as the Kivung, which means a meeting, or it can be used as a verb, to meet. The Kivung was first established in the 1960s, when the entire region was under the colonial administration of Australia. Much of the impact of colonization on the peoples living in the rainforest was pretty oppressive and negative and exploitative. There were some positive things, such as the introduction of new technologies, particularly medicines and steel tools, including things like bush knives and axes, which soon became ubiquitous because of their obvious utility. But missionaries also tried to make people feel ashamed of the way that they dressed, saying that people were naked and that their traditional beliefs and ways of life were flawed and immoral. The government forced people to pay taxes, which for many meant taking low-paid jobs on plantations. Most devastatingly of all, they helped more powerful ethnic groups and foreign companies to make inroads into the rainforest, tearing down trees to make way for cash crops, particularly coffee and cocoa and copra. The leaders of the Kivung argued that if all the people in that region of the rainforest could somehow unite together, they could fend off the threat from logging companies, from sawmills and from plantation owners. But this wouldn't be easy because most of the tribes in the forest spoke different languages. And in the past, they'd mostly been at war with one another. The idea of joining together, joining forces, working together to protect the rainforest seemed quite impossible. But the Kivung provided an ingenious solution. It was a solution that combined the wisdom of indigenous and Western religions, combining the discoveries of both to create an organization powerful enough to fend off the growing threats to their ancient way of life. Although Papua New Guinea's rainforest has been depleted at an alarming rate since my fieldwork back then in the 1980s, the rate of tree loss in the region where the Kivung spread is strikingly less than in regions where it didn't. I believe there are important lessons here for tackling global collective action problems affecting all of us. And the story I have to tell is ultimately all about nature-based solutions. But the nature I'm talking about here is human nature. As human beings, we all share a collective inheritance, something very precious that belongs to all of us, whether we realize it or not. Part of that inheritance is biological, and it includes features of our psychology that evolved under natural selection. In this book, which just came out last week, as Justin just explained, I argue that we need to find more effective ways of managing our natural predispositions and susceptibilities. Our ancestors realized this. In fact, this is exactly what they have been doing for thousands of years, enabling us to build ever larger societies and more complex forms of cooperation. Their collective accomplishments also form a crucial part of our collective inheritance, the culturally evolved methods of harnessing human nature so as to scale up cooperation in ever more impressive ways. Unfortunately, however, technological innovation in the modern world is now accelerating at such a pace that our tried and tested methods of scaling up are starting to fail us. Our economies are becoming less sustainable, our societies more polarized, our wars more destructive, and our capacities for regional and global cooperation are becoming less and less effective. But I believe we can turn this situation around. Over several decades, I've been working collaboratively with a very wide range of human scientists to develop empirically testable theories of how we can improve our capacities to cooperate, despite the many challenges that we now face. I've also worked with literally hundreds of historians and archaeologists to build databases that can be analysed statistically to help us understand how complex societies managed to evolve and scale up in the ways that they did. If we draw on our collective inheritance wisely, building on a deep understanding of our shared psychology and history, I believe we can overcome many of the most serious problems facing the world today. In this talk, I'm going to just focus on one of the key challenges that we are facing today, and namely the climate crisis. And I'm going to home in on just one of the many features of our evolved psychology that I think, in fact, the book discusses quite a number of them. Justin just mentioned cohesion. There's a huge focus of interest in the book, but I'm not going to talk about that. What I'm going to talk about today is conformism. And, well, let me start by asking, could you put your hands up if you're a conformist? Because I like to see how many there are. There's only one or two. Isn't that interesting? How few there are. I'm putting my hand up because I'm one of them. I think the thing is that most of us think of conformism in a very negative way. We think, it implies just blindly copying other people in a kind of sheep-like way, not thinking for yourself, lacking imagination, lacking creativity, all those nasty things. But actually, the truth is we are, all of us, naturally massive conformists. It's a very fundamental feature of our shared human psychology. Without it, actually, we wouldn't have cultural groups. We wouldn't have cultural traditions. We wouldn't know how to dress appropriately or how to eat politely or how to greet each other or interact with strangers, etc., etc. Like many other sort of universal features of our evolved psychology, conformism is a trait that emerges very early in development. Now, psychologists have known for some time that if you show if you show children an unnecessarily complicated way of retrieving an item from a box like this one, they'll copy not only the causally necessary behavior, but they'll also copy the pointless actions. In fact, even if you tell them to look out for silly elements like tapping the box with a feather or something like that, things that don't actually help with getting the object out of the box, the children copy them anyway. It's almost as if they can't help themselves. Now, psychologists refer to this as over-imitation. And for quite some time, they were thinking that over-imitation evolved to help children acquire complex technical skills before they properly understood how those things actually work. But some years ago, my colleagues and I had a sort of different hunch about this and embarked on a new line of research on over-imitation, which led to a very different perspective on the issue. In our early studies, we had children aged about between 4 and 6 years old to watch a video of a model carrying out an action sequence they'd never seen performed before using a pegboard and various sort of unfamiliar objects. The model in the video moved the objects around in distinctive ways, twirling them in the air and tapping them together in a highly stylized fashion before placing them back on the table. And the children were assigned to one of two conditions. In one condition, at the end of the elaborate demonstration, the model in the video placed the last item in a box, suggesting that the whole business was really just a very elaborate way of putting something away in a box. In the other condition, exactly the same action sequence was modeled, except that the last object ended up exactly where it started. So there was no difference between the start state and the end state of the action sequence. And we reasoned this is more like a kind of ritual performance because there's no instrumental value in the action whatsoever. And then we simply pushed all the unfamiliar objects towards the child participants and said, there you go. There was no instruction as such, we just gave them the materials that they'd seen being used in the video. And what we found was quite striking. Children copied what they'd seen more faithfully and were less likely to innovate and do something different of their own when the action had no conceivable end goal, when the start state and end state were identical. I think these experiments began to tell us something really profound about human nature, in particular that we copy things for social and not just for instrumental reasons. Now, one very important key piece of evidence for this was discovered by one of my PhD students, Rachel Watson-Jones, who showed that when children are worried about being left out, when you prime the threat of ostracism from the group, then the ritualistic type of imitation increases even more dramatically. So, for most of human prehistory, the cultural traditions associated with different human groups were based on forms of ritualistic over-imitation that were locally distinctive. People copied the conventions and the norms that happened to become established in their own particular communities. But these communities were typically small, limited to the people you happen to know personally in most cases. And archaeologists, studying the remains of these ancient societies, have shown that as you move across the landscape, the cultural features of these different groups changed from one location to the next, each population displaying its own distinctive group identities. By contrast, of course, most countries today are united by common identities encompassing millions of individuals, all subject to a common system of government and law. One of the main reasons for the vast expansion in the scale of human societies has to do with the way our propensity to over-imitate was harnessed by new cultural institutions over the course of world history. And one of the most important human discoveries of all time in this particular respect was routinized ritual, the habit of carrying out the same forms of over-imitation on a day-to-day basis. Routinizing collective rituals has two very powerful effects. Firstly, it makes deviations from the standard script easy to detect. And this means that when people step out of line, they can be socially sanctioned. Secondly, when rituals become habitual, this makes us less reflective and more willing to accept whatever the group's leaders tell us. Both of these factors actually take conformism to a new level. The power of routinization is that it allows you to spread a shared set of identity markers to a really large population, and to do it very quickly. All you need is a handful of proselytizing leaders willing to travel from one community to the next, spreading the same ideas and behaviors, and you can create very soon a vast tradition encompassing indefinitely many communities. And you can stabilize and maintain that tradition over time by repeating the beliefs and practices very frequently. Now, some of the earliest evidence for increasingly routinized rituals comes from Çatalhöyük in central Anatolia, in what's now modern Turkey. This is one of the first regions on the earth where farming first emerged and spread. At Çatalhöyük, people were beginning to plant crops for the first time. They were beginning to develop crops like wheat and barley, for example, and to domesticate animals, initially sheep and goat, and later cattle. I went to stay at this site many years running in order to work with the director of the excavations, Ian Hodder from Stanford University. Hodder and I came to the conclusion that over nearly the sort of nearly 2,000 years of settlement at Çatalhöyük, the ritual life was changing quite fundamentally. In particular, rituals associated with domestic spaces and farming practices were becoming more and more frequent. And the more ancient sporadic rituals associated with hunting and feasting were actually dying out. And as rituals became more frequent, many features of the cultural system became more standardized. For example, stamp seals and pottery designs started to look more similar and to spread to larger and larger groups. And as a result, the first really large-scale cultural traditions were starting to emerge. And together with my collaborators, we've since found evidence for similar patterns across scores of other archaeological sites spanning this transition from foraging to farming. So the key take-home here is that in the earliest farming societies, the natural human propensity to over-imitate ritualistically was being increasingly routinized, leading to much larger scale cultural groups with more stable traditions. Now, over the millennia that followed, religious organizations of all kinds continued to use routinization to build larger scale traditions. They learned how to maintain their orthodoxies by getting their followers to participate in the same rituals week in and week out, listen to the same speeches and narratives over and over in churches and mosques and synagogues and temples. And by getting people to sing from the same hymn sheet, both literally and metaphorically, these organized religions eventually became world religions. And I describe this process in a lot of depth in the book. Whereas this process took thousands of years in many parts of the world, the Kivung movement in Papua New Guinea managed to accomplish something very similar in just a few decades. It used the method of routinizing the group's beliefs and practices to unify the many different language groups living in the rainforest in this region. The Kivung did it by establishing a very repetitive system of rituals that were performed in exactly the same way throughout the hundreds of villages that joined the movement. These rituals involved the laying out of offerings to the ancestors in specially constructed temples, day in and day out, week in and week out. And they involved a host of rituals aimed at eliminating feelings of shame that had been inculcated by the Catholic missions. Meanwhile, other routinized rituals were devoted to things like the cleaning of ancestral graves, the fending off of communal, looking after, let's say, of communal gardens, and other sort of works for the community. Above all, Kivung rituals revolved around village meetings. Communities met at every conceivable opportunity, and these meetings had many functions. They resolved disputes and restored the peace. They entertained visitors from other villages. They were places to discuss issues of cosmological and moral concern. And there were places to build harmony and cohesion among participants. Now, when I was collecting life history data from people who joined the Kivung in the early days, they frequently emphasized how incredibly impactful and life-changing it had been for them to be able to travel to other villages for miles around, going deep into what had once been enemy territory, to be welcomed now as friends and invited to participate in the same familiar Kivung rituals that they would have been performing in their own villages. This allowed people to coordinate their efforts regionally to establish schools and aid posts. It enabled leaders at the Kivung headquarters to train local councillors and help to ensure that the same basic system of beliefs and practices were being faithfully maintained across the movement as a whole. And by pulling together in that way, the Kivung was able to become a powerful electoral force, getting its leaders into both provincial and national governments, where they were able to champion the rights of indigenous communities and their rainforest environment. Now, when I got back to England after living there for 2 years, I was struck by the fact that the society in which I'd been raised seemed to have been heading in pretty much the opposite direction. That is, it was becoming less cohesive. And I argue in the book that this trajectory had to do in part with the declining power of routinized rituals. It may be tempting to attribute declining ritual routinization in the modern world to processes of secularization, but actually, the globalizing decline in shared forms of routinized ritual is not at all restricted to religious contexts. It can be seen across many different spheres of modern life. In our domestic lives, for example, we're less likely than ever before in human history to engage in highly structured rituals like family mealtimes. Our ideas about formal education are increasingly focused on instrumental outcomes, such as exam results and league tables. Our workplaces are likewise organized increasingly around audit culture and maximizing efficiency. Working hours are becoming more flexible and less synchronized, and factory production lines are becoming more automated. At the same time as more old-fashioned forms of routinization and cohesion are going into decline, new varieties of conformism are becoming established in their place. Advertising is now increasingly shaped by algorithms that track what kind of content we like to view on the internet and accordingly directing us to more and more of it. In effect, our consumption of products and ideas is being herded in ways that suit commercial interests rather than the interests of the wider societies in which we live. Now, one way to remedy these problems is to reclaim the power of ritual and routinization in more positive ways. In the new book, I argue that the best way to manage our natural conformism is not by pursuing a conservative agenda, serving the kinds of patriarchal or elitist institutions that we cleaved to in the past, but instead I suggest we reinvent whatever forms of routinized ritual are best adapted to the needs of the kinds of societies we'd like to build in the future. For example, in the domain of education, we could use classes and assemblies to embed more environmentally friendly norms and practices. In the world of work, we could also develop new traditions celebrating purposeful capitalism and the ideas of the donut that we've just been hearing about. By focusing more on the pro-social contributions of people's jobs, we could also make working life far more motivating. Government and public sector canteens could routinize more sustainable forms of food consumption. In our homes as well, we could embed stronger cultural systems that invoke and involve more ethical norms aimed at reducing carbon emissions, improving biodiversity, fostering things like values like inclusivity and global citizenship. Since organized religion is also central in the lives of billions of people around the world, this is a domain also where ritual has a crucially important role to play in fostering more sustainable norms and behaviors. We know it can be done. For example, a few years ago, Sikhs around the world celebrated the 550th anniversary of their religion, or the birth of their founder actually, by planting 1 million trees. Religions also have a massive potential impact on our dietary habits and restrictions. What if these rules could be made to be more focused on sustainable consumption? For example, less about eating fish on Fridays and more about, say, for example, foregoing meat on Mondays. To scale up more sustainable norms and practices, we also need more effective forms of leadership. Imagine if every national government around the world were to have a minister with responsibility for climate change. One country that has actually established such a role is Vanuatu, where the office holder currently is Ralph Regenvanu. I first met Ralph Regenvanu in March last year when I was out there carrying out field work on one of the more remote islands. And I arrived in the immediate aftermath of one of the worst natural disasters in the country's history, in which two massive tropical cyclones struck the country in rapid succession, destroying much of the country's infrastructure. As Vanuatu was reeling from this national disaster, the minister prepared to lead a delegation to the UN seeking legal recognition of the rights of peoples most directly affected by the climate crisis. Before he left, we got to talking about which lines of argument were likely to be most effective in this campaign. We agreed that, of course, science must always be our main guide when it comes to trying to understand the causes of climate change and what needs to be done in response. But we also shared the hunch that scientific arguments aren't necessarily the best way to get people to act. After a lot of discussion, the minister agreed to let me write him a series of speeches about what we need to do to address the climate crisis, all very similar in length and style, but each one appealing to different arguments. One speech emphasized the standard scientific arguments, but the others all appealed to our natural psychological biases. Our goal was to establish empirically which of the speeches had the biggest effects on willingness to take action on the climate issues. We filmed the minister's speeches and then we showed them to a large sample or series of samples of people actually in the UK, the US and South Africa. And what we found was that when the minister appealed to the kinds of ideas that motivate loyalty to the group rather than to the arguments of science, this had a much bigger impact on people's willingness to act on the climate crisis and actually on a cascade of other variables like how positively they felt about the possibility of tackling the crisis. For many years, my colleagues and I have been running studies to explore how different facets of human nature can be harnessed to tackle global challenges. Most recently, for example, we've shown that speeches appealing to feelings of kinship, which are central to all human societies, and we heard examples of that just a little bit earlier, can have a huge impact on willingness to act on global challenges. The evidence cumulatively suggests that leadership and compelling speeches can have an important role to play in motivating action on the climate crisis. But to make those changes stick, we really need to become, we need to establish ways basically of embedding those practices more deeply into our thinking. And to embed shared ideas at scale, they also need to become routinized. They need to become part of the habits of everyday thinking as well as everyday behavior. A key take home from a lot of the research on conformism, which I talk about a lot more length in the book, is that we copy each other for reasons that go way beyond instrumental goals. And for this reason, it would be a big mistake to think about nature-based solutions purely in instrumental terms. As human beings, we often solve collective action problems by herding together in ways that have little to do with instrumental reasoning. Much of the time, we copy each other in order to affiliate. And when conformism becomes routinized, the groups we affiliate with can grow larger and more impactful. Routinized norms and practices, whatever form they may take, are becoming increasingly globalized, whether we like it or not. The question is whether we want to take control of the content of those beliefs through collective consensus, or whether we're willing simply to sleepwalk into lifestyles and forms of consumerism driven by market forces. Consider the following routinized norms that are now globally recognized and seldom questioned. And they're very much like the norms that Kate just described for economics. Everything has a price. Time is money. You need money to make money. Phrases like this are so familiar and the ideas behind them so seemingly obvious and beyond question that we actually don't question them. But it was a very different story for the people I lived with in the rainforest in Papua New Guinea. In their world, very few objects had a price for a start. And houses, for example, they were made from materials gathered from the surrounding forest. Food was grown in local gardens or hunted and fished. Coffee and cocoa, of course, did have a monetary value, but they had no other use. People who wanted cash for crops might plant coffee and cocoa trees and sell their fruits to middlemen, but few people had any idea, actually, what became of that produce after it was sold. It was clearly inedible in its raw form, because nobody in the village actually drank coffee or ate chocolate. So the end products of the manufacturing process were mysterious. In fact, they were entirely valueless from a local perspective. The remarkable thing about the Kivung was that it considered carefully various routinized norms of capitalism, looking at them all through fresh eyes. This process of reflection was carried out in regular and wide-ranging discussions across literally hundreds of communities. And as a result, people reached a consensus on how to respond. In this book, I argue that citizens' assemblies have a very similar role to play in helping us determine our pathways forward, not only in local communities, but also at scale. This is one of the ways in which I think we can draw on our evolutionary past to plan together for a better future. But those plans will also need to be embedded through frequent rehearsal and routinization. My book explores the evidence for many other features of our evolved psychology, from the tendency to believe in supernatural agents and forces to the power of chiefly mana, and from the roots of future-mindedness to the role of shared experiences in motivating strong forms of cooperation and self-sacrifice. All these features of human nature have been harnessed in the past to achieve remarkable things, both good and bad. Human nature has been used to drive some of the ghastliest forms of warfare imaginable, but also to motivate the most extraordinary forms of peaceful cooperation, ranging from acts of charity to the exploration of space. Our ancestors have bequeathed to us a remarkable set of tools for cooperation, and we can use this collective inheritance to address the climate crisis and many other collective action problems threatening the world today, if we can do it in a way that draws skillfully and strategically on what has been learned about our shared psychology and history. And the aim of my new book is really to help us with that vitally important task. Thank you very much. Thank you.
With the previous session and then during your talk, I was reflecting on the fact that since the pandemic, the proportion of global wealth that's owned by a minority has exponentially increased. And as we've been discussing, it's a system that's based on extraction and exploitation. So I also thought about the first keynote by Unai, which talked about values, plural values, and the challenge of instilling social norms that respond to those values. So based on your work, my question is, how do we overcome, how do you see us overcoming the structures and social relations that keep the current system in place? So as you showed with the Kivung, for example, but how quickly do you see that potentially happening in our current society? Is there a tipping point that you might foresee? Thanks.
Thank you for that question. I guess two things of importance to say about this are, firstly, that I have focused on one aspect of human behavior that I think has an enormous role to play in changing the norms that we all live by. But it's not the whole solution to the problem of the climate crisis or to the kinds of inequalities that you talk about. We need structural change as well. But these are not sort of stark alternatives. I think a lot of people say that if you are trying to address sort of popular grassroots sort of behaviors and norms, that you're sort of pushing the problem onto us rather than where it belongs, with the very small number of powerful vested interests in the world and powerful and power holders in the world, let's say, just generally. But I actually think we need to change both of those things. And you ask about the pace at which we can change things. I think the Kivung actually is inspiring in many different ways, but one way in which I find it very inspiring is that they managed to bring about very rapid change in just a few years, such that, you know, it surprised many people actually, including many of their close kinsmen, who felt that it would be unthinkable to change traditions and norms and ways of behaving within years. They felt it was a hopeless idea that you would imagine a way of, for instance, uniting different language groups that were traditionally at war. But they did it. And I think, optimistically, that we can change many of the sort of assumptions that we make. The snake that we were looking at earlier in that wonderful demonstration by Kate, is just a human artifact. And human artifacts, whether they take the form of norms or objects or whatever form they take, are changeable, they're mutable. We can make them what we will.
We're getting into sort of the beliefs and the values, and Kate and Kamana talked about values and those sort of deeper structural things. And what would be your advice to this community that works across nature-based solutions to talk to those in power that perhaps are less inclined to let go of some of the power structures? In the Kivung example, I imagine it took that collective responsibility that Kamana talked of, and yet we try to have that, and yet people are holding on to power. So in the construct we are in, how do we actually kind of unlock more of that collective action in the different? I don't know if you have any thoughts on that.
My thought on that is that I think it's important to differentiate those things that we can change, the things that really are the artifacts of cultural evolution that can be changed actually quite more rapidly than we think they can, from the things that we cannot change. And, you know, in the book, I make a distinction between three fundamental features of our evolved psychology that simply will not go away. And I call those things conformism, and I talk briefly about that one. I also talk about religiosity, which is a whole cluster of many different psychological mechanisms, actually. And I also treat under that heading our sort of deep moral intuitions, which I think are also pan-human and have a deep evolutionary history that is not going to go away. And I also talk about tribalism, and there are many dimensions to that. The way that we become loyal to groups, and in some cases we'll even sacrifice ourselves for the sake of a group. These are powerful forces that can be used for, in destructive ways. They can drive warfare, they can drive all kinds of behaviors that we would not, I presume most people in this room would not want. But they can also provide us with ways of solving problems if we tap into them in the right way. A lot of people would argue, a lot of public intellectuals would say that actually things like, sort of conformism and religiosity and tribalism are at the root of all of our problems, and our best hope is to try and eliminate them. And my reaction is good luck with that, because these things are just not going to go away. And really what we need is to work with the grain of them successfully. But if we don't recognize which things are there to stay, and will just resurface naturally each time a child is born, from those things that we can actually change quite dramatically, very rapidly, is very difficult to make progress. I think making that distinction and understanding the difference between those two types of sort of evolved features is crucially important to our success.
In civil society studies, we see many forces that work against joining together, so deinstitutionalization, dropping off. In your own research and the examples you've given us, are there any ways that we can think practically about how we can counteract those forces that are so strong now?
There are many ways in which we can counteract them. I think one of the problems has been that we tend in political spheres, in many areas of human life, particularly in large-scale societies, a lot of our group alignments are built around what psychologists call identification, which basically means that you cleave to some kind of idea of a group identity that you acquired socially through learning from other people. You didn't come up with it. That might be a religion, a national identity, an ethnic identity, a professional. I mean, there's so many groups. I study football fans. It's often a very important one for those people. But there are many different groups. And those kinds of identities exist before we did, and they will be there after we go. So they're not something that that gets linked deeply to our sense of personal self. And those kinds of identities are kind of depersonalizing. If you make them salient for somebody, then your identity as a unique and distinctive person becomes less accessible. That's a very powerful form of group alignment. It's a very pervasive form of group alignment. And one of the features of it is that when you identify with a group in that way, you automatically feel somewhat competitive to people who aren't in that group. So it comes with, naturally, automatically, it triggers a feeling of out-group derogation, is the term that our psychologists generally use. You think that the out-group is a competitor. In some cases, you're willing to see it in such a negative light that you would actually like to destroy or damage that out-group. And that way of thinking, us-them thinking, lies at the root of many human problems when it comes to our sort of group psychology, if you like. And you ask me, what do I think is the solution? One solution to that is a much deeper and more profound form of loyalty to groups, which my colleagues and I refer to as identity fusion. And there, that relationship between your personal identity and your group identity is less hydraulic, if you like. It's not like oil and water, that the one displaces the other. It's more synergistic. It's like when you're fused with a group and your group is made salient, so too it taps immediately into your personal identity as well. In fact, if somebody attacks your group, you take it personally. And that is a very, very strong form of group alignment, one that motivates, in many cases, extreme forms of pro-group action. At the most negative end, we've shown that it's a very important factor in some forms of terrorist violent extremism. And in, sort of other groups, maybe perfectly legal military groups, where you might want to deliberately cultivate that very strong form of cohesion in a group. But, and this is less widely appreciated, is that when you're fused with a group, you don't automatically feel competitive towards an out-group. In fact, the group that most people are likely to say is their top choice of group that they're fused with is their family. And people don't, naturally, when they love their families, but it doesn't mean they feel competitive towards other families. Fusion doesn't automatically create this competitive attitude. And we've shown that actually fusion can be scaled up to extended groups, bigger and bigger groups. We found high levels of fusion, for instance, in some religious groups. We found it in national groups, and we found it even in relation to humanity at large. And I think a lot of the problems that we face on a global level can be addressed more effectively if we can scale fusion up to that level. If you can become fused with humanity at large, you suddenly start to think of the whole of humanity as more like family. There are two pathways to fusion, and they both can be, we've demonstrated this empirically, both of those can be used to crank up fusion with humanity. One is the idea, the appreciation at a deep level that we are all descended from common ancestors, which means that we're all related, not just all of us in this room, but everyone everywhere in the world. This is a very powerful idea that we can emphasize more in our thinking. Another idea I think that is very unifying for us is the idea of shared experience, the stuff that shapes your personal identity. Without that, you wouldn't be you. If you share that kind of thing with humanity at large, that's a very motivating idea when it comes to solving global collective action problems. We've shown that, childbirth, an experience shared by so many women all around the world, when you think about it and feel it deep down as a shared experience of all women around the world, creates a strong sense of sisterhood that can motivate action to solve global problems. So there are things like that that I think have enormous power and potency, and we don't use enough.
It's a wonderful way to end. So Harvey, thank you so much for your talk and for stimulating so much thinking in this way. So please join me in thanking Harvey.